Clara sighed, staring at the shards of glass scattered across the hallway floor. Her reflection, fractured and distorted, stared back from the largest remaining pieces of the mirror. She stood frozen for a moment, wondering how many years of bad luck this one accident would cost her. "Great, just what I need," she muttered, shaking her head. Her reflection, blurry and bent, seemed to agree. She bent down carefully, picking up the larger shards, trying to avoid another mishap. Typical. Of course this would happen today, of all days, right after the conversation with Greg. He had been distant lately, pulling away more and more until their last phone call had ended with nothing but silence. She'd stared at the phone for a long time, waiting for him to say something, anything, to fill the void between them. But instead, here she was, cleaning up broken glass and feeling more than a little symbolic. As she tossed the pieces into the trash, Clara glanced at the empty wall where the mirror had once hung. It felt wrong, somehow, to leave it bare. She had never liked seeing blank spaces, too much like a void staring back at her. "I'll just get a new one," she said out loud, trying to convince herself that replacing it would be easy. "There's that old shop downtown, the one I always pass by but never go into." She'd been meaning to explore Evansville more since moving here 2 years ago, but life had a way of distracting her. Or maybe she just let it. Either way, today felt like the day for distractions, and an old mirror seemed like the perfect project to keep her mind off things. Besides, her apartment needed something to fill the emptiness Greg had left behind. As she slipped on her shoes and grabbed her keys, she caught a glimpse of herself in a small living room mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw something off. "Get a grip, Clara," she muttered to herself, shaking her head as she turned away from the reflection. "You're just tired." Her clumsiness had always been a running joke, both in her family and among friends. Well, back when she had more friends to joke about it with. Breaking the mirror was just one more thing to add to the ever-growing list of mishaps that followed her around like a dark cloud. 7 years of bad luck was the last thing she needed. She didn't want to think about it too much. Dwelling on her mistakes, whether big or small, had never done her any good. The mirror could be replaced, and maybe it would feel like a fresh start. Maybe, she thought as she locked the door behind her. The new one would even show a better version of herself. Her apartment building sat on a quiet street in downtown Evansville, not far from the riverfront. She loved the charm of the city, the way the Ohio River's steady flow added a serene backdrop to the urban hustle. It wasn't a big city, but it had character. The kind of character that made her feel like she could start over here, away from her past. Walking through the downtown area always helped clear her head. The historic buildings, cobblestone streets, and small, locally owned shops made her feel grounded, even when her mind felt like it was spinning. She thought about Greg as she walked, about how things had been good at first, and how they'd both been excited about moving in together. But time had a way of wearing down excitement, of making it easier to ignore the small cracks forming between them, until one day, those cracks were too big to overlook. Now, she was left with an apartment full of empty spaces and a relationship in pieces, just like the mirror. "Okay, new rule," she muttered to herself, kicking a loose pebble on the sidewalk. "No more thinking about Greg today. Today's about getting my life back together, one piece at a time." With that thought, she turned the corner onto an unfamiliar street. She knew the shop was close, but she hadn't paid much attention to its exact location before. It was the kind of place you pass by without noticing, unassuming, blending in with other old storefronts. But today, she had a reason to find it. and just ahead, she spotted it. The old antique shop tucked between a boarded-up diner and a pawn shop. It looked as though it had been there forever, its exterior worn and faded, as though time had forgotten about it. "Perfect," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She didn't know why, but something about the shop made her hesitate at the door. Maybe it was the fact that the windows were so clouded with dust and she couldn't see inside. Or maybe it was the strange feeling that washed over her, a sense of being watched, even though the street was empty. The store had no sign, only a brass doorknob and a weathered green door. She hesitated briefly, her hand hovering over the doorknob, before shaking off the unease that clung to her. Clara shook her head and pushed the door open, stepping inside. The steady hum of Evansville's streets faded as Clara stepped into the antique shop, nestled between a shuttered diner and a pawn shop. Inside, the air was thick and still, the scent of old wood and paper hanging in the atmosphere. Shadows clung to the corners, where shelves bulged with forgotten relics. There was no sound beyond the faint squeak of the door closing behind her. The shop felt like a place where time didn't move, where everything was suspended in an unspoken agreement to be forgotten. Clara shivered as she moved deeper into the space, her fingertips brushing the tops of cracked leather books and tarnished trinkets. The air was colder than outside, almost as if the shop itself had its own chill, seeping into her bones. Her gaze wandered over the shelves, cluttered with random oddities. Old clocks, dusty paintings, faded photographs of people long gone. Everything seemed to have a story, though none of them felt like they belonged to her, until she saw the mirror. Half hidden behind a towering stack of furniture, it stood out from the rest of the clutter. A tall, oval-shaped mirror with a frame that looked like it had been carved from blackened wood centuries ago. The glass was fogged and grimy, but there was something about it that drew her in. She stepped closer, the cold air growing more pronounced the nearer she got.
"Looking for something?"
The voice startled her. Clara turned sharply to see an old man standing behind the counter, his eyes sharp and unblinking. He seemed to blend into the shop, his skin as leathery as the antiques surrounding him. I didn't see you there," she stammered, her voice catching in her throat. "The mirror, it just caught my eye." He didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared at her with those unnervingly sharp eyes.
"Ah, yes, the mirror. It tends to do that."
His words hung in the air longer than they should have, leaving Clara feeling oddly exposed. She glanced back at the mirror. The breath marks were faint but visible on the glass, like someone had been standing too close, exhaling against the surface. For a second, she thought she saw her own reflection moving, though she hadn't shifted. How much?" she asked, hoping to break the silence. Her voice sounded small in the vast stillness of the shop.
"For you?"
The old man chuckled softly.
"Take it. No charge."
Clara blinked, surprised. "What? Really?" He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion.
"That mirror has been here longer than I can remember. I think it's been waiting for someone like you."
A chill ran down her spine, though she wasn't sure if it was his words or the cold air pressing down on her. She turned back to the mirror, and for a moment, the reflection didn't seem quite right. Her face looked distorted, stretched by the grime that obscured the glass. But it was just her imagination, wasn't it? "Thank you," she said quickly, now eager to leave, though she couldn't explain why. "I appreciate it." The old man gave her a strange smile, the edges of his lips curling in a way that made her feel uneasy.
Take care of it now.
As she left the shop, the mirror cradled under her arm. She couldn't shake the feeling that the old man was still watching her. The door shut with a faint click behind her, cutting off the last of the shop's cold air. But as Clara walked back toward her apartment, the chill lingered, settling in the pit of her stomach. The mirror felt heavier with each step as Clara made her way back to her apartment. She kept glancing at it, though she wasn't entirely sure why. It was just a mirror, after all, a replacement for the one she'd broken. But there was something about it that tugged at the back of her mind, just out of reach. By the time she reached her door, her arms ached from carrying it. She fumbled with her keys, balancing the mirror against her hip as she pushed the door open. Her apartment greeted her with the unusual silence, the kind of silence that came with living alone. She set the mirror down carefully in the hallway, pausing for a moment to catch her breath. The light from the window caught the edge of the glass, revealing more of the grime that coated it. For a brief second, she thought she saw a shadow flicker behind her reflection, but when she looked again, there was nothing. Just a foggy outline of herself, distorted and smeared.
Get a grip, Clara,
she muttered, shaking her head.
It's just a mirror.
Still, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled over her since leaving the shop. She tried to convince herself it was just the atmosphere of the place, the old man, the cold air. But that didn't explain why the unease was lingering here, in the safety of her own home. Clara glanced around her apartment, the familiar surroundings suddenly feeling less familiar. The couch, the bookshelves, the half-empty coffee cup on the table. They were all the same as always, but there was an odd emptiness that seemed to cling to the air. Maybe she was just overthinking things. She had a habit of doing that, after all, especially when she was stressed. "All right," she said to herself, her voice breaking the silence. "Let's just clean it up, and then everything will feel normal again." Grabbing a damp cloth from the kitchen, she knelt down in front of the mirror. The grime wiped away easily, revealing the glass beneath. As she worked, the unease seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet focus. This was something she could control, a simple, mundane task, and in some strange way, it felt like a small victory. She wiped the last of the dirt away and stood back, finally able to see her reflection clearly. The frame, once hidden under layers of dust, was intricately carved with strange patterns, twisted vines and shapes that didn't quite make sense the longer she looked at them. "Okay, that's different," she murmured, tilting her head to study the carvings. They didn't seem to follow any particular style that she could identify, but there was an unsettling elegance to them, like something ancient and forgotten. Her reflection stared back at her, the apartment's dim light catching the glass just right. She smoothed her hair absently, her fingers trailing along the edges of the frame, but something was off. For a heartbeat, Clara's reflection didn't move. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was just for a second, just a flicker, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. She blinked hard, shaking her head, trying to dispel the sudden wave of panic. "Just tired," she whispered, though her voice sounded hollow in the empty apartment. "You're just tired." Clara stepped back, rubbing her hands on her jeans, as if that simple act would shake off the lingering unease. But she couldn't bring herself to look at the mirror again. Not right away. Instead, she stood and crossed the room, flipping on a light as though it would drive out whatever shadows her mind was conjuring. The room seemed brighter now, but the mirror, it still sat there, reflecting the apartment back at her with an odd clarity. The unease lingered, settling like a weight in the pit of her stomach. Clara tried to push it away, tried to ignore the way her reflection had froze for that brief, impossible moment. "Maybe you just need some sleep," she muttered to herself, heading toward the kitchen. The act of making tea always calmed her, and right now, she needed that calm more than anything. She poured water into the kettle, watching as steam began to rise. But even as she focused on the simple, familiar task, her thoughts kept drifting back to the mirror, to the way it seemed to watch her, even when she wasn't looking directly at it. Her reflection had moved, hadn't it? Clara glanced over her shoulder, back at the mirror. It sat silently in the hallway, its surface now gleaming clean, reflecting the apartment behind her. The tea kettle whistled, breaking her focus. "Maybe tomorrow, I'll just move it somewhere else," she said, more to herself than anything. "Somewhere out of sight." But even as she thought that, part of her knew it wouldn't help. The next morning, Clara woke with a dull headache, her sleep having been restless and filled with strange, fragmented dreams. Something about shadows and whispers she couldn't quite recall. She stretched and groaned, her eyes drifting toward the hallway where the mirror stood, catching a sliver of light from the window. For a moment, she considered covering it with a sheet or even moving it to another room, but she dismissed the idea, brushing off the previous night's unease as nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. Still, she found herself moving past it more quickly than usual as she headed into the kitchen to start her day. She had work to catch up on. Emails, invoices, the usual busy work that filled her mornings. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her thoughts kept drifting back to the mirror. She hadn't noticed it as much before, but now it seemed to cast a shadow over the entire apartment, even when she wasn't looking at it. By late afternoon, Clara had enough. The mirror had wormed its way into her thoughts all day, and it was driving her crazy. She stood up from her desk, determined to distract herself with anything. Errands, groceries, something that would keep her out of the apartment and away from the silent, reflective presence looming in the hallway. Grabbing her coat, Clara made her way toward the door, but as she passed the mirror, something caught her eye. She paused, staring at her reflection. It looked normal, but the longer she stood there, the more something felt off. Her reflection seemed sharper somehow, more focused than the rest of the room behind her. Her heart skipped a beat when she noticed it, the faint outline of breath fogging up the glass. "No," Clara said as she stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. That wasn't possible. She hadn't even been that close to the mirror. And yet there it was, a soft, translucent mist, like someone had been standing on the other side, breathing against the surface. She stared for a moment longer, her mind racing for a logical explanation. Maybe the glass was just cold. Maybe it was some sort of draft she hadn't noticed before. But deep down, she knew that didn't make sense. Trying to ignore the pounding in her chest, Clara turned and grabbed her keys, practically bolting out of the apartment. The cool air outside was a relief, crisp and real against her skin. She stood in the hallway for a moment, leaning against the door, trying to steady her breath. "You're losing it," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. "It's just an old mirror. There's no reason to freak out." But the unease lingered, clinging to her like a second skin. As she headed down the street, Clara tried to shake off the strange feeling. She focused on the mundane things, the sounds of traffic, the distant hum of conversation from people passing by, the comforting buzz of city life. But it wasn't enough to push the mirror from her mind. By the time she returned from her errands, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the streets of Evansville. Clara hesitated at the door to her apartment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She shook her head, forcing herself to turn the key and step inside. The mirror was right where she'd left it, standing silently in the hallway. There was no fog on the glass now, no sign that anything was out of the ordinary, just her own reflection, tired and frazzled. She tried to laugh it off.
See? Nothing weird. Just your imagination running wild.
Still, she found herself avoiding the mirror as much as possible. She kept busy for the rest of the evening, cooking dinner, watching TV, anything to distract her from the nagging sense that something wasn't right. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat in the back of her mind, quiet but persistent, like a low hum she couldn't quite tune out. It wasn't until later, when she was getting ready for bed, that it happened again. As she brushed her teeth, she caught sight of the mirror in the hallway. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the bathroom fan. For a brief moment, everything felt still, almost peaceful. Then she heard it. A whisper, faint, barely audible, like someone was standing just behind her, speaking in a voice too soft to make out. Clara froze, her toothbrush halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted to the mirror. Nothing, just a reflection. Standing still in the dim light, she held her breath, listening. The whisper came again, this time clearer. It wasn't words, more like a breath, a soft exhale. Too close, too real. She dropped the toothbrush, her heart hammering in her chest. It couldn't be real. She was alone. There was no one else in the apartment. But the sound had been so close. Clara took a shaky step back, her eyes locked on the mirror. For a moment, she was sure she saw movement, a flicker in the reflection, like something shifting just out of sight. But when she blinked, it was gone. She slammed the bathroom door shut, her breathing shallow and rapid. Leaning against the door, she closed her eyes, trying to calm herself. "It's just stress," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "Just stress." But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed that anymore. The following days blurred together in a haze of anxiety. Clara tried to focus on her work, but thoughts of Greg invaded her mind like unwelcome intruders. He hadn't called in weeks, and while she told herself it was fine, he was busy, caught up with his own life. The silence gnawed at her. Each missed call felt like a crack forming in their relationship, a fissure she could feel widening with every passing moment. She tried to convince herself it was just the mirror playing tricks on her mind. Maybe the unease was merely an extension of her feelings about Greg. After all, when everything felt unstable, it was easy to project that instability onto the strange and eerie. But as she moved through her days, the mirror continued to loom over her, a constant reminder of the anxiety curling in her stomach. On Friday evening, Clara stood in front of her closet, debating what to wear for a gathering she'd been invited to, a friend's birthday party. She needed to get out, to be with people and feel normal again. But the thought of being around others, laughing and pretending everything was fine, felt suffocating. With a sigh, she settled on a simple black dress. As she slipped it on, the thought of Greg crept back in. Would he even care? They had spent so many nights together before he drifted away. She could still hear his voice sometimes, but it was growing fainter, like a song she loved but couldn't quite remember. "Focus, Clara," she whispered to herself, trying to shake off the memories. She reached for her makeup but hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. The mirror waited silently, the darkness of its frame almost inviting her to take a closer look. Against her better judgment, she approached it, feeling the chill of the air. Increase as she drew near. The surface gleamed under the light, revealing more intricate carvings than she had noticed before, swirling vines and strange faces hidden in the patterns. Clara leaned in, her heart racing as she studied the reflection. "Just me," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. But the moment she spoke, she heard it again, a soft whisper, like a breath exhaled in her ear. "Why did you let him go?" Clara jumped back, her pulse racing. She could have sworn it was coming from the mirror, yet she was alone. The sound sent her thoughts spiraling into darkness, twisting the anxious knots in her stomach tighter. What if it was Greg? What if he had called, and she hadn't noticed? Or worse, what if he was moving on without her? Her thoughts tangled together, and she turned sharply, walking back into the living room. She picked up her phone, staring at the blank screen, half expecting it to light up with a message, but it remained dark and silent. "This is ridiculous," she told herself, pacing the floor. "Get it together." But the words felt empty. She couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was somehow tied to her growing anxiety, that it was feeding off her fears. Every time she looked at it, the whispers returned, mingling with thoughts of Greg and the relationship that had slipped through her fingers. Clara rubbed her temples, trying to dispel the headache forming at the back of her mind. She needed to go to the party, to be around friends, to escape the tension suffocating her. With a deep breath, she grabbed her purse and made her way out the door. The party was a blur of laughter and music, but Clara felt like an outsider looking in. She smiled and chatted with her friends, but her mind kept wandering back to the mirror, to the whispers that haunted her even in the company of others. Greg didn't show up, and every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped, only to fall when she saw it wasn't him. "Hey Clara, you okay?" A friend leaned in, her voice cutting through Clara's spiraling thoughts. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, though the words felt hollow. "Just a little tired." "Maybe you should get some fresh air," her friend suggested, motioning toward the patio. Clara nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape the noise. Stepping outside, she inhaled the cool night air, hoping it would clear the fog clouding her mind. The stars flickered above her, distant and unchanging, a reminder of the stability she craved in her own life. She leaned against the railing, letting the chill seep into her skin, grounding herself. But even in the stillness, the whispers seemed to echo in her mind, mingling with her unresolved feelings for Greg. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out everything. Maybe if she just focused on the night, on the beauty around her, she could find some peace. But when she opened her eyes, the patio door swung open behind her, and a familiar figure stepped outside. Greg. He looked different, tired maybe, but also distant, as if the space between them had grown too vast to bridge with just a few words. Clara's heart raced, a mix of hope and apprehension flooding her senses. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "I didn't think you'd be here." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I almost didn't come." As they stood there, silence hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. In that moment, she felt the pull of the mirror back at her apartment, its whispers creeping into her thoughts again. She wondered if the shadow of their past was as tangible as the one lurking behind her reflection. "Can we talk?" he asked, the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. Clara nodded, but the unease settled back into her stomach. A cold reminder that some mirrors reveal more than just reflections. The silence stretched between Clara and Greg like a taut wire, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. She looked into his eyes, searching for the warmth they once held, but found only shadows lurking there. "Let's sit," he suggested, gesturing to the nearby bench. Clara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. As they settled down, the air felt charged, every unspoken word swirling around them. "I've missed you," Clara started, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't know how to reach out." Greg looked down, tracing patterns in the wood with his fingers. "Things have been complicated." "Complicated? You just disappeared," Clara replied, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I thought we were in this together." "I needed space," he said, finally meeting her gaze. The words felt like a blow, and Clara's chest tightened. "Things got overwhelming." "Overwhelming? What does that even mean?" She fought to keep her voice steady, but the hurt seeped through. "You didn't even say goodbye." His eyes darkened, and Clara felt a chill creep into the air around them. "I thought it would be better this way." "Better for who?" she shot back, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily on her shoulders. In that moment, she was acutely aware of the whispers swirling in her mind.
Why can't you see the truth?
They seemed to hiss.
He's lying to you.
Clara swallowed hard, shaking her head to dispel the voices that tugged at the edge of her sanity. "I came here hoping we could fix things," she admitted, her voice softening. "But it feels like you're just gone." "I'm still here," he said, his tone barely above a whisper, but the distance in his eyes said otherwise. The world around them seemed to dim, and Clara's heart raced as she felt the ground shift beneath her. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions.
"Greg, please," she pleaded, desperate for clarity. "I need to know if there's still something here."
He hesitated, his brow furrowing as if grappling with something deep inside him. "There's always something," he finally replied, "but I don't know if it's enough."
"Enough for what?" Clara pressed, her frustration boiling over. "Enough to be together? Enough to fight for what we had?"
"Enough to make you happy," he said, and in that moment, Clara felt the weight of his uncertainty, the burden of his doubt crushing her spirit. The whispers echoed louder now, cutting through her thoughts like shards of glass.
"You're not enough,"
they taunted.
"He will never choose you."
Clara closed her eyes, trying to silence the voices that clouded her mind.
"I just want to understand,"
she murmured, tears threatening to spill over. "Maybe we need more time," he said, looking away. "Maybe." Suddenly, Clara's phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her back to reality. She fished it out, her heart racing, but the screen showed no notifications. Just as she looked up, she saw Greg's expression shift, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face.
"What?"
she asked, sensing a change in the air. "Nothing," he replied too quickly. I should go."
"No, wait!"
Clara reached out, but he stood abruptly, the tension between them snapping like a brittle string.
"Can we talk more? I don't want to leave it like this."
"I have to think," he said, backing away, his eyes darting toward the patio door as if he were searching for an escape.
"Think?"
Clara echoed, her voice rising in panic.
"What is there to think about? We're falling apart!"
As he turned to leave, Clara felt a sudden chill, and the whisper came again, sharper this time.
"He's slipping away." "No!"
she shouted, desperation clawing at her throat. But the words echoed into the night, swallowed by the laughter and music from inside. Greg paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Confusion etched on his face. Clara, But before he could finish, the mirror's pull surged within her, a deep, irresistible gravity that tugged at her very core.
You need to let him go,
it seemed to murmur, the cold air wrapping around her like a shroud.
I can't,
she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks.
I can't lose you.
With a final, lingering look, Greg disappeared back inside, leaving Clara alone in the darkness, the night closing in around her. The echoes of their conversation hung in the air, suffocating and heavy. The whispers continued to taunt her, wrapping around her thoughts like tendrils of shadows.
He's not yours anymore,
they hissed.
You'll be alone.
Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. In the distance, she could hear the faint strains of music and laughter, but all she felt was a growing dread. She turned away from the door, staring into the shadows that cloaked the patio.
Get it together,
she whispered, wiping her tears away. But as she looked back toward the door, the faint glow of the mirror lingered in her mind, its whispers calling her back to a reality she feared to face. Clara stumbled through the door of her apartment, the weight of the night crashing down on her like a tidal wave. The laughter and music from the party still echoed in her mind, but all she could feel was the empty ache in her chest. She had thought seeing Greg might clear the fog enveloping her thoughts, but now she felt more lost than ever. The familiar surroundings felt alien as she stepped inside. The dim light cast long shadows across the room, and her gaze was drawn immediately to the mirror standing against the wall. It loomed larger than life, its surface reflecting her disheveled appearance and the remnants of her tears.
Why did I let it get this far?
She murmured to herself, running a hand through her hair in frustration.
Why couldn't I just make him see?
As she approached the mirror, Clara felt a chill in the air.
You should have fought harder,
a voice whispered, low and haunting, sending a shiver down her spine. Clara shook her head, trying to dismiss the chilling sensation that clung to her. She dropped her purse onto the couch and stared into the mirror, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. The intricate carvings seemed to twist in the low light, almost alive in their movements.
Just a reflection,
she whispered, but doubt crept in, gnawing at her insides. With a sense of urgency, she wandered into the kitchen, attempting to drown her thoughts in mundane tasks, pouring herself a glass of water, pacing the small space, but the whispers clung to her like shadows.
You'll always be alone,
they breathed, a chilling reminder of her deepest fears.
Stop it!
Clara snapped, desperation edging into her voice. But the quiet of the apartment deepened her sense of isolation, and panic began to rise within her. She needed to do something. Anything. The mirror loomed in her thoughts, its pull irresistible. It was just a mirror, she told herself. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that it had its own desires. As she stepped back into the living room, the air felt charged, vibrating with an energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Clara swallowed hard, her heart racing as she approached the mirror.
What do you want from me?
She whispered, half expecting a response. The surface shimmered, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, like a shadow moving just beyond her vision. But when she blinked, it was gone, leaving her staring into the stillness of her reflection.
Help me,
she murmured, feeling a strange desperation creeping into her voice.
Just tell me what to do.
The whispers intensified, swirling around her with an unsettling gravity.
Embrace the darkness,
they urged, their tone almost a chant that vibrated through her. Clara's heart raced, an intoxicating mix of fear and intrigue flooding her senses. Could she trust it? The allure of understanding, of unlocking whatever mystery lay behind the mirror, was too strong to resist. She felt herself being pulled into the depths, the edges of reality blurring.
Please,
she begged, her voice trembling.
I just want to be free.
And then, as if a response to her plea, the mirror shimmered again, revealing fleeting images, glimpses of moments long past. Her laughter with Greg, the warmth of his embrace. But beneath it all, darker scenes flickered, echoes of loneliness, of isolation. The whispers settled into a haunting cadence, wrapping around her thoughts like a shroud.
You're never alone,
they breathed, their presence suffocating yet oddly comforting. Clara felt her resolve waver, the weight of despair pressing down on her. What would it mean to surrender to the darkness? She was so tired of fighting, of feeling lost. The whispers felt like balm in her aching heart, soothing her insecurities and wrapping her in a cocoon of acceptance. With a deep breath, she stepped closer, the world around her fading as the mirror's surface drew her in. The reflections twisted and turned, pulling her deeper into their depths, promising a truth she yearned to understand.
Embrace it,
the whispers urged, their tone low and resonant, echoing through her mind. Clara reached out, her fingers grazing the cool surface, feeling the vibration hum beneath her touch. Clara's fingers trembled against the cool surface of the mirror, a jolt of energy coursing through her as she pressed deeper. The reflection began to ripple, distorting her image into a kaleidoscope of shapes and shadows, and with one final push, she felt herself drawn into its depths. A rush of air enveloped her, cool and unsettling, as the world around her dissolved. Clara gasped, instinctively reaching for something solid, but her hands grasped only emptiness. She tumbled through the void, colors swirling around her in a cacophony of light and shadow, each hue laced with whispers that surged and swirled like smoke.
Welcome,
a voice echoed deep and resonant, curling around her like a serpent.
You've come to seek what lies hidden.
Clara blinked, her surroundings shifted into focus. She stood in a dimly lit space that felt both familiar and foreign. Shadows flickered like candle flames. A cold shiver danced down her spine, and a sense of dread settled in her gut.
Is this a dream?
She whispered, uncertainty lacing her voice.
Reality bends here.
The voice murmured, a soft, sinister laughter lingering in the air.
What you desire can be found, but not without sacrifice.
Sacrifice? Clara's heart raced. A knot tightened in her chest. What do you mean? The shadows shifted, coalescing into images, memories of laughter shared, arguments flared, and moments of intimacy that felt hauntingly distant. Each scene tugged at her heart, filling her with an aching nostalgia that threatened to overwhelm her.
Everything has a price.
The voice whispered, now mingling with a chorus of soft, echoing tones.
What will you give up to know the truth?
I just want to understand, Clara said, her voice trembling as she glanced around, the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on her.
Look deeper.
The shadows urged.
Embrace the darkness that surrounds you. It holds the key to your fears.
Claire hesitated, the air thickening around her, filled with an energy that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "What do you want from me?" she asked, but the words felt hollow in the oppressive silence that followed.
Only that you listen,
the voice replied, the sinister tone wrapping around her thoughts like a vice.
Only that you see.
With a shaky breath, Clara stepped forward, drawn by an unseen force. The shadows closed around her, whispering promises that sent chills racing down her spine.
Fear is a cage,
they breathed.
Break free.
"What will it cost me?" Clara asked, her heart racing. She could feel the darkness pressing against her, its presence almost tangible.
To know the truth,
the voice replied, low and resonant.
You must confront the darkness within. What will you surrender? Your memories? Your past?
Clara's breath hitched. "No, I can't. I won't give that up."
Then you will remain a prisoner,
the shadows hissed, their tone dripping with malice.
Each moment you cling to your fears, you bind yourself tighter to your regrets.
She clenched her fists, feeling the weight of their words settle like a stone in her gut. "What do you want me to do?"
Embrace the darkness,
they whispered, voices intertwined, haunting her thoughts.
Let go of what you once were. It is the only way to see what lies ahead.
The air thickened with tension, Clara's heart racing as the whispers danced around her. They promised liberation, but hinted at something darker, something that gnawed at the edges of her sanity. "Will I lose myself?" she asked, the words barely escaping her lips. The shadows seemed to draw closer, wrapping around her like a suffocating fog.
In losing, you will find,
they murmured, their voices a seductive lullaby.
In embracing the darkness, you will reclaim the light.
"What if I can't find my way back?" Clara breathed, fear coursing through her veins. "What if I become one of you?"
Join us,
the voice coaxed, its tone sweet yet sinister.
We are your greatest desires, your darkest fears. You cannot escape us, but you can become one with us.
Clara swallowed hard, feeling the shadows encroaching upon her. Every fiber of her being screamed to resist, yet the pull of understanding was intoxicating. The fear of the unknown gripped her, but the yearning of freedom pushed her forward. With a deep breath, she stepped closer to the swirling darkness, ready to confront whatever lay within. "Show me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of dread and anticipation. As her fingertips brushed against the mirror's surface from within the void, a wave of energy surged through her, and the world shifted again. The shadows pulsed with intensity, enveloping her in a veil of darkness, whispering promises of revelation and power that sent chills racing down her spine.
Embrace it,
they chanted, a haunting symphony that echoed through her mind. Clara felt herself falling deeper, an abyss yawning wide before her, ready to consume her. The whispers grew louder, more urgent.
Your fears await.
They hissed, their voices merging into a chilling crescendo.
Step forward and uncover what lies beneath. But beware, the truth you seek may shatter your very soul.
As Clara's vision darkened, a shadowed figure loomed just beyond her reach. Its outline flickered like a dying flame. The air thickened with dread, a palpable force urging her to yield.
Let go.
It beckoned, a sinister whisper that promised both power and ruin. The darkness closed in around her, and she knew whatever waited on the other side of this cursed mirror would change her forever.
Step forward.
They urged, a cacophony of voices blending into one seductive command.
Let the truth wash over you.
Clara took a shaky breath, the air thick with the stench of decay and sorrow. She stepped closer to the looming figure in the darkness, its shape flickering like a dying candle, a reflection of her own shattered soul. "What do you want from me?" she croaked, her voice barely breaking through the oppressive silence.
Everything,
the figure whispered, its voice a haunting melody that resonated with her fears.
You seek understanding, yet you fear what it might cost.
"What are you?" Clara demanded, desperation creeping into her tone. "What do you want me to see?" The figure shifted, becoming more defined, its features a grotesque parody of Clara herself, eyes hollow and dark, a smile stretched too wide, revealing teeth that glinted like shards of broken glass. "I am the reflection of your truth," it hissed, a chill crawling up Clara's spine. "I am your past, your regrets, your darkest secrets." Images flashed before her eyes. Greg's betrayal, the laughter that had turned to screams, moments of weakness and self-loathing that clawed at her insides. The shadows whispered her failings, wrapping around her like barbed wire, each word lacerating her heart. "Join me," the figure beckoned, its voice dripping with an unsettling sweetness. "Together, we can reclaim the power you've lost. Let go of the chains that bind you." Clara felt the weight of their words, the seductive promises of freedom intertwined with her deepest fears. "What will it cost me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Only your soul," the figure replied, its grin widening, revealing a gaping maw that seemed to draw in the very light around it. "In surrendering, you will transcend your pain. Embrace the darkness, and you shall be reborn." A surge of dread twisted in Clara's gut. "No!" she breathed, shaking her head. "I won't let you take me!" The figure lunged forward, its form shifting into a swirling mass of shadow and light, a whirlwind of chaos that threatened to consume her. "You cannot escape me," it screeched, the voices rising in a deafening chorus. "You are already mine." Clara stumbled back, the realization crashing over her like a wave. The whispers had been right. She had been a prisoner of her own fears, and now, faced with the embodiment of her darkness, she felt a pull toward it, an inexplicable longing for release. "Let me show you," the figure hissed, its voice now a dark lullaby. "Look into the mirror of your soul." As it spoke, the air shimmered, and the surface of the mirror began to ripple. A portal that revealed her apartment. This creature walked through it. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she watched her own form, alive yet unreachable, moving through the space she once knew so well. In the reflection, the figure stepped closer, mimicking her movements with an eerie precision. Its smile, a twisted imitation of her own. Clara felt a jolt of horror as it opened her front door, stepping out of her sanctuary with a casual grace, as though it belonged there.
No!
Clara cried, pounding her fists against the unyielding surface of the mirror.
Get away from my life!
But her cries echoed back to her, swallowed by the darkness that surrounded her. The entity opened the front door again, stepping back into the apartment and walking up to the mirror. This is your choice, Clara. You have invited me in. You were trapped by your own desires. The figure turned back to the apartment, and Clara watched helplessly as it began to mimic her life, laughing with friends, engaging in the mundane routines that had once brought her joy. Each laugh rang hollow, each movement a mockery of her existence.
No! Stop it!
Clara shouted, but the figure merely laughed, an eerie sound that resonated through the void, deepening her sense of dread. You wanted to join me, Clara. This is what you truly wanted, to escape the pain, to be free. It taunted, and the weight of its words pressed down on her chest.
Remember.
The whispers taunted, swirling around her, echoing through the void.
You made a deal with the darkness. Now it's yours to bear.
Farewell, Clara, it mocked, a sinister smile stretching across its face. I will enjoy your life. The apartment, once a sanctuary, was now a stage for her tormentor. Clara's heart raced as she pounded against the mirror, her reflection fading from view, replaced by the entity wearing her skin, a twisted version of herself, fully alive and free. And with that, the darkness surged, leaving Clara behind, a mere observer in her own nightmare. She was trapped, forced to watch as the entity lived her life, laughing, loving, and thriving, while she was confined to the void. She was lost, forever a prison in a realm of shadows, her hands pressed against the cold surface, screaming in silence. In the depths of your desires, beware the shadows that whisper promises too sweet to resist. For in the pursuit of what you long for, you may find yourself lost in darkness, a mere spectator in your own life. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my little tale of possessed items from antique shops. I don't know why, but I find that that is a really fun subject to make a good story, especially this close to spooky season. So let's talk about the AI here. I wanted something that was like a possessed item from an antique shop, and it gave me that, but I didn't want to make it too cliche. So an old mirror, it kinda is cliche, but the personality of the character mixed with that incident of breaking the mirror and having to replace it, and then that whole thing kind of creeping in, and especially mixed up with her lifestyle and how things are going with her, that just blended for a wonderfully creepy story. So that worked out really well. As always, I have my Buy Me a Coffee link. It's always appreciated but never expected. I do love me some coffee when I am working on these stories. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my stories, and please share them with others. And doing this goes a long ways to help us creators. And in saying that, it's okay to be scared. I am too. Embrace the strange, embrace the spooky season, and I'll see you next time.